This video is a quick overview of our first major project, which is evaluating an argument. So just real quick, I want to emphasize that evaluating an argument is not the same as responding to an argument or taking a stance on an argument. You are literally, when you're evaluating an argument, doing what's called a critical analysis of how the article was written. It's almost, if you want to think of it like a critique or a formal peer review in some ways, where you're really looking at the structure and how the argument was put together, what it's missing, what its strengths were, what its weaknesses are. That's what you're really focusing on. So it's not about the topic or your personal opinion about the topic for this particular type of writing. So first off, I just want to start with purpose. Why are you doing this type of project? The reason we do this is because you are going to need to be able to evaluate a whole bunch of different resources closely and really step out of how you feel about the topic in order to find the best research possible for you to eventually use in your own argument essay and visual argument. So that's the reasoning for it, is this is really a step in order to gain and find and use the absolute best research and information that you can find. So I wanted to start with some things to avoid or to not do with this particular essay. First of all, just to clarify, if you haven't done this type of writing before, it should be structured as an essay. When you do set it up though, you don't want to include paragraph length or really long pieces of summary or specifically referential summary of the article. And again, as a reminder, that referential summary, that's where you're just repeating the author's claim or thesis and main ideas. That's all you're doing. You're not adding how the author did it, the structure of it, anything like that. It's just the key points or ideas from the article is what a referential summary is. And that doesn't benefit you for this type of essay because you're not writing about the topic, you're writing about how the author wrote about the topic. So that's just something to make sure you stay away from, that you avoid. Also, your personal opinion about the topic and the stance is irrelevant for this essay. So really try and keep your own bias out of it. It doesn't matter whether you agree or disagree with what the author is saying. You're trying to establish if the author is credible, if the article in general is credible, not just the author. So again, try and remove your personal opinion about the topic or the argument away from your evaluation. Third, try to avoid doing extensive research. Sometimes what I've seen when students do tons and tons of research is that they end up writing more about the topic or the argument than they do about how that specific article wrote about the argument or wrote about the topic. Now, things you might want to research, yeah, you're probably going to need to do a little research on the author. You might need to do some research on the evidence or source material the author included to see if it is in fact credible. But beyond that, there really should not be a ton of other research, and most of your support should be coming from the article itself. Finally, this is just good advice in general for college writing, but particular for writing in our class. Stay away from the pronouns you and your. They actually can cause issues with being offensive because you're giving commands when you use that. Also, there is vagueness or a lack of clarity when you use those terms, which really can impact what you're saying. Just in general, it's a good idea to avoid all personal pronouns. They're unnecessary when you're doing this type of argument writing. So that's just something to keep in mind as you begin working and thinking of how you're going to structure and what you're saying, is to, again, take that personal aspect sort of out of it. Now, as far as the flip side of this, some things that you do want to make sure that you do. One of the best ways to start this type of essay is to actually start with a rhetorical summary of the article. And this is a way to lead into your essay. And again, that rhetorical summary is how the article is structured, right? So you might start with the author's claim. Then how does he support that? How is the article organized? Are there weaknesses, flaws? You're really giving that summary of basically what you're going to address for the rest of your essay. Now, not all essays are set up with that, start with a summary and then elaborate on it, but for this particular type of essay, that actually works really well. Also include a clear claim of your own to start the essay, and for your own claim, and it doesn't need to be the first sentence. In fact, it's probably better if it isn't, but just somewhere early on in your essay, make sure that you actually address the question, which is the article credible for other college students to use? If so, how? If not, why not? Right? That's the piece that holds the whole thing together. That's what your purpose is. That's what you're trying to determine. So you want to make sure that your stance on that is clear up front. That way, every paragraph that follows is going to clearly tie back and connect back to that point. Make sure that you do include actual evidence from the article to back up what you're saying. If you say that the article doesn't have that it lacks clarity, well, pull an example from the article showing how it lacks clarity. If you think an article uses too much evidence, pull a section from the article that illustrates that it's using too much evidence or that there's a lack of evidence. Pull a section where they should have included a source. You want to actually use quotes or paraphrases to back up what you're saying. You can't just make a claim about the article and not prove it or illustrate it. Next, I want to just really emphasize that when we talk about MLA format in this class, it is not just how you visually set up the essay. Yes, that's part of it. It's not all of it. It also includes how you integrate the source of material. Things like starting your quotes or paraphrases with lead-ins such as according to whatever the author's name is, or in this particular article, give the title. It includes, okay, you got to have some sort of lead in, and then you got to follow up that paraphrase or quote with explanation. In addition, you got to have that in-text citation. For MLA, that means there should be some parentheses at the end of every sentence containing source material that gives the next bit of information about that source. So if it's an article and there's page numbers, all the articles in our book have page numbers, the page number should go there first and foremost. But it's always whatever the next piece of information is, and then that information should always tie directly to your Works Cited page, and you must have the Works Cited page. For your Works Cited page for this essay, it's very possible that you just have the citation of the article that you're evaluating. That's fine, but it still has to be there. Next, clearly meet all of the project requirements, and I'm actually going to flip and go onto the page where it lists them out. So this is the directions for this article as they're written. I just scrolled down a little bit. So it gives your audience, it gives your purpose for writing. Sections to include. Do not gloss over this. Like, I'm telling you the areas that you have to make sure and touch on or review. So sections, credibility of the author. We will have already done a practice on that. You will already done some research. Hopefully that piece of it should kind of be finished for you. The credibility of support evidence or sources used in the article. The clarity of the claim. That should also include the type of claim and if the support that they use matches that type of claim or is logical for that type of claim. The logical organization of the article. Does it make sense the way it's set up, or is it a little confusing, hard to follow? How does that impact then the credibility of it? And of course, the audience awareness of the author. Who was the author trying to write to? Did they successfully consider the values needs of that particular group? Was their tone appropriate for that group? Did they use a level of word choice that was appropriate for that group? And just one little key note about audience. Audience is never going to be general. There is going to be some targeted group someone is writing to. Now, it might be a large group, like maybe someone is writing to all law enforcement officers. Law enforcement officers is way more specific than general public. So make sure that when you're doing that audience section, that you really are stepping back and trying to figure out, well, who was the article actually targeting? Who was the intended audience? Couple things about the minimum requirements listed below, besides that you have to include those sections. When it says 2 to 3 full pages in length, that does not include your Works Cited page. And if it's 2 full pages in length, that is 2 full pages in absolutely correct MLA format with 0 extra spacing, perfect margins, all of that. I always will tell you, go over whatever the minimum page limit is. If it says 2 to 3, go a little bit onto that 3rd page for safety. I do not want anyone to fail this essay simply because you didn't write enough. That's not a good reason. If you don't pass an essay, it should be based on that the quality of your writing wasn't quite there yet, not because you didn't meet page length or follow some other basic direction. The other pieces on this, I'm going to just kind of leave as you can read through them in requirements. I mean, it needs to be formatted like an essay. I already said that. It needs to be focused on how the argument's written, that MLA format, and then of course, no plagiarism. Do you want to emphasize that no plagiarism does mean direct intentional plagiarism as well as unintentional. So be super cautious when you're using source material. If it is someone else's idea, even if you reworded it into your own words, you still must integrate it, cite it, and include it on the citation page. So be really cautious of that as you work towards putting this essay together. Finally, the last two little things. When you're focusing on how the article was written, you're focusing on the structure of it, not what it says or the just ideas of the author. One thing that may help is to think of it as a critique of how the author is arguing rather than what they are arguing about. So how are they going about making their argument? Do they give a clear claim? Do they include statistical evidence? Do they include personal evidence? Do they include interviews? Do they include, right? It's really looking at how they're doing it, not exactly what they're saying about it. And then again, just to emphasize, I mentioned earlier, yeah, do some limited research to make sure that you check the author and evidence. Just don't go too far overboard. Your evaluation should be based on your own evaluation of the article, not what other people think about it. So that's some general tips and advice just to get you started. Again, if you have any questions as you work throughout this project, do not hesitate to ask. And of course, I'll be kind of seeing your progress as you work throughout the different steps of the writing process as well. And with that said, good luck, and I look forward to seeing how your drafts come out.